and welcome to Understanding Hindutva. My name is Sarvajit Thakur. In the next hour, we will investigate the origin and evolution of the term Hindutva. Has a recent emphasis on this concept, particularly in India, in the process of celebrating the rich cultural heritage common to Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs, alienated Indians of other faiths and posed a threat to the unity of India and split the diaspora, or have the detractors misrepresented the concept and even weaponized it to drive a wedge in the Hindu community and divide it? Why is it so controversial and politically charged for an Indian to celebrate the common heritage of his country with this concept of Hindutva, while it is perfectly acceptable when a Thomas Jefferson or a Dwight Eisenhower or an ordinary American posits that his country is founded on Judeo-Christian principles? So Judeo-Christian principles in America is all right, but Hindutva for Hindus is not acceptable. So to help us with answers to some of these questions, we are joined by two distinguished panelists. First, we have Dr. Shreerang Godbole. He's joining us from Pune. He's an endocrinologist by profession. He has authored 2 books on diabetes. He has also authored several books in Marathi, Hindi, English, and other languages on Islam, Christianity, Buddhist-Muslim relations, Veer Savarkar, and Ganesh Damodar or Baba Rao Savarkar. He is currently researching the life of Dr. Keshavrao Baliram Hedgawar, the founder of the RSS. Welcome, Shreerangji. Also joining us from Philadelphia is Shri Saumitra Gokhale. He's the global coordinator for the Hindu Swayam Sevak Sangh, a movement that promotes practicing of Hindu values for the well-being of all humanity. Originally from Pune also, he completed his master's degree in engineering from Canada and became a pracharak of the RSS in 1995. Since 2000, he has served as a pracharak of the HSS in the Caribbean and the US. He travels to many countries, inspiring volunteers to selflessly dedicate their time and talent for society, culture, and dharma. Saumitra ji is on the advisory board of the Seva International Organization, ICCS, and HUA. He will be focusing on Hindutva in the context of the diaspora. So a warm welcome to both Shreerangji and Saumitraji, and over to you now, Shreerangji.
Thank you so much, and my pranams and greetings to all the dignitaries and delegates to this virtual conference. At the outset, I must thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to participate in this panel. We are going to try to understand Hindutva, and I'm going to talk about the historical development of this term, how it was coined and defined. And I would like to share some slides with you if I could have the controls.
Yes, you should
have the controls.
Yes.
I have the controls?
Yes.
Yes, you do. Yes.
Okay, I hope you can see this slide. And we'll begin with the galaxy of certain illustrious individuals who laid down the philosophical contours of the present day Hindutva movement, as it is called. Some of these faces may not be so familiar, so let's begin from the top. In the top row from the left, you have Rishi Rajnarayan Bose, followed by Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who founded the Arya Samaj. Then, of course, is Swami Vivekanand. And then there is Lokmanya Tilak. In the bottom row, from the left, you have Yogi Aurobindo, who incidentally was the maternal grandson of Rishi Rajnarayan Bose. And then the next person is Ganesh Damodar or Babarao Savarkar, a revolutionary in his own right, but the elder brother of his more famous sibling, Veer Savarkar, whom you can see next. And the last, of course, is M.S. Golwalkar or Guruji, the second Sarasangachalak of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh and a co-founder of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. Now, these individuals more or less have laid down the philosophical contours of the Hindutva movement, but none of them actually coined the term Hindutva. That credit goes to a Bengali thinker and author called Chandranath Basu, who lived from 1844 to 1910. And in this particular book called Hindutva, Hindu Prakruto Itihas, which he wrote in 1892, this is the first time the word Hindutva was used. Now, this book is in Bengali, it's available online, but I don't understand Bengali. But apparently, Chandranath Basu advocated an Advait Vedanta form of thought. And he said that the Hindus were the only beings to attain a spiritual consciousness which enabled them to realize that humanity, in fact, is another form of divinity. So Chandranath Basu, to him goes the credit of actually coining the word in 1892. But much before that, in 1866, Rishi Rajnarayan Basu, who was the headmaster of a school in Kolkata, in Midnapur, he penned his thoughts on Hindu revivalism and Hindu nationalism in the Indian context. And this he did in 1866. Very influential thinker, influenced among others Swami Dayanand, Bankim Chandra, of course his maternal grandson Yogi Aurobindo, but among others he also influenced these two youngsters whom you see over here. One is Navagopal Mitra and the other is Dwijendranath Tagore, whose more famous sibling is Rabindranath Tagore. And all three of them together founded the Hindu Mela in 1867, which was held annually for the next 13 years up to 1880. Now, remember, this was the time when India was in bondage and the white man had taken upon himself the burden of colonizing and civilizing the world, the heathens, especially the Hindus of India. And imagine the consternation which may have occurred when Rajnarayan Basu in 1866, in the capital of British India in Kolkata, he organizes a lecture on the superiority of Hinduism to other prevailing religions. And you can read this lecture online. I encourage you to read that. But basically, Rajnarayan Basu enumerates 12 points why Hinduism is superior to other prevailing religions. So he says that Hinduism owes its name to no man. There's no mediator between God and man. Hindu worships God at all times, whether it's business or in pleasure. The Hindu worships God for the sake of God. He practices virtue for the sake of virtue and not to get some eternal happiness in some imaginary heaven. He says Hinduism inculcates universal benevolence. Other faiths are merely the refer to the man. Hinduism is non-sectarian, non-proselytizing. It's preeminently tolerant. Its history dates back to the infancy of time and so on and so forth. This is a lecture I would encourage all of you to please read. It's available online. The next milestone in an attempt to define a Hindu was none other than by Lokmanya Tilak. And these are 6 lines in Sanskrit that you can see where he defines a Hindu, but they were not written at the same time. The first 2 lines actually were uttered by him in a speech in the Ganesh festival in 1900. And there he defines Hindu Dharma as he understands it. So according to him, the attributes of Hinduism or Hindu Dharma are threefold: the infallibility of the Vedas, the multiplicity of means, and non-insistence on any means or modes of worship. These were the first 2 lines in 1900. But subsequently in 1915, in a magazine, Lokmanya Tilak added 4 other lines which actually describe a Hindu individual. And he says that he who accepts this dharma, which he has already defined in the previous 2 lines, he who accepts this dharma has received samskars in accordance with the rites laid down by the Shruti, Smriti, and Purana. He who does action with faith and devotion, and he who follows conduct as laid down by the Shastras is a Sanatana Dharmi Hindu. This is Tilak's definition of a Hindu. Now, I wonder, going by that definition, how many of us today would qualify as Hindus? But that was not the point at that time. There's a serious lacuna in Lokmanya Tilak's definition. He insists on acknowledging the infallibility of Vedas as an attribute essential for Hinduism. But at the same time, there are several sister communities within the Hindu fold which do not accept the Vedas as infallible, such as the Jains, the Buddhists, the Lingayats, and so on. So at one stroke, actually, Lokmanya Tilak's definition excludes these very Hindus from the definition of Hindu. So that was a serious lacuna. It was too restrictive a definition. Now, though many stalwarts have actually laid down the philosophical contours of Hindutva, only 3 stalwarts actually authored books on Hindutva, so to speak. And I'm going to focus on the central person in this slide, that's Veer Savarkar. But I'll just mention in passing 2 others who also authored books on Hindutva. To the left is his elder brother, Baba Rao Savarkar or Ganesh Damodar Savarkar. In 1934, he authored a Marathi book called Rashtra Mimamsa, which stands for Elucidation of Nationhood. It was a 78-page book which influenced, among many others, M.S. Golwalkar, who in 1939 translated and abridged this 150-page book into a 78-page book called We or Our Nationhood Defined. So now, contrary to popular perception, the latter book is not an exact translation of the former. Golwalkar or Guruji wrote down his own thoughts which were not there in the original book. So these are, so to speak, 2 other books, strictly speaking, which have been authored by someone, by stalwarts on Hindutva. But we now focus on Veer Savarkar. Savarkar's literature on Hindutva alone, now his whole literature encompasses some 9,000, 10,000 pages. But his literature on Hindutva consists of 3 main books. His seminal book called Hindutva, which I again encourage all of you to read. It's freely available online. The next is Hindu Rashtra Darshan, which is a collection of his 6 presidential speeches to the Hindu Mahasabha sessions from 1937 to 1942. Again, a book I beseech all of you to kindly read online. And the third book is a Marathi book, Hindutva Che Panchapran, which essentially covers the points which he has made in the first 2 books. So I'll be only focusing on the first seminal book called Hindutva. Now, this book was actually the question of who is a Hindu was preoccupying Savarkar's mind even when he was a revolutionary in London in 1906 to 1910. But there were other pressing issues before him. So it was only when he was lodged in the cellular jail in the Andamans that he devoted his energies and his mind to this question. And he even had some discussions with his co-political prisoners. But it was actually in Ratnagiri jail. Ratnagiri is a place in coastal Maharashtra. So after his release from the cellular jail in Andamans, he was kept for some time in the Ratnagiri jail. It was there that he surreptitiously wrote this book, manuscripts, it under a pseudonym called Maratha. And on the right, you can see the image of the actual first edition of the book, published in May 1923. Hindutva, it's a seminal work. It continues to be the intellectual bedrock even of the present day Hindutva movement. It's now nearly 100 years since it was written. Now, Savarkar is a poet. He's a great author. He opens this book by quoting Shakespeare, and he says, what's in a name? And he says, you cannot possibly call Ayodhya as Honolulu, and you cannot call George Washington as Genghis Khan. So there is much to do in a name, and there is a lot to do with the name Hindutva, which is why prophets and poets, lawyers and lawgivers, heroes and historians have thought, lived, fought, and died just to have Hindutva spelled thus. This is how he opens his book. And Savarkar is a great barrister. He is very precise in his choice of words. This is one of his famous sentences. Confusion in words leads to confusion in thoughts. And therefore, right in the beginning of the book, he distinguishes between two cognate terms, Hindu Dharma and Hindutva. And he says Hindu Dharma is a theory or a code more or less based on spiritual or religious dogma or system. It's a collective term to denote the federation of spiritual traditions and sects that consider Bharat to be their fatherland and holy land. He uses the term Pitrubhu and Punyabhu. But Hindutva is even more comprehensive. That is what he says. Hindu Dharma itself is a broad term, but nonetheless, it's a fraction. It's a derivative of a much wider, a more comprehensive term called Hindutva. Because Hindutva refers not only to the religious aspect of the Hindu people, but even their cultural, linguistic, social, and political aspects. It is more or less akin to Hindu polity. And if you really want to exactly translate this word into English, as was previously said, that English word would be Hindu-ness, the essence, so to speak. And then the third word is Hindudom. I'm speaking in front of a global diaspora. I'm speaking to Hindudom, a Hindu world. It's Hindu people spoken of collectively. Right in the beginning, Savarkar says the word Hindu is not of a foreign origin, as widely believed it was given to us by Arabs or Persians. He says that our ancestors, their civilization flourished on the banks of the 7 rivers, Sapta Sindhu, so to speak, and these 7 rivers of their habitation evoked a divine love and homage of our ancestors. But of those 7 rivers, the presiding river, the Sindhu or the Indus, was a visible symbol of their common nationality and culture. And therefore, in recognition of the gratitude to these 7 rivers, and particularly the presiding river Sindhu, Savarkar says that Sapta Sindhu or Sindhu was the cradle name chosen by the patriarchs of our race to designate our nation and our people. Now, there are some linguistic rules. So in Sa, the syllable Sa in Sanskrit becomes Ha in Prakrita, from where all our sister languages are derived. So for example, Saptah becomes Hapta. So even heptarchy in English or European languages, Kesari becomes Kehri, Krishna becomes Kanha, and likewise Savarkar says Sindhu became Hindu. So essentially the original word Sanskrit is Sindhu, the Prakrit word is Hindu, and he says if Prakrit is older, then maybe Hindu is an older word. That is what Savarkar says. And other nations, including the Avestic Persians, used to call us Hindus, the Greeks called us Indos, the Chinese called us Hindu. So Hindu is a geographical concept, but it also has cultural connotations. Now, according to Savarkar, there are 2 criteria to call a person Hindu. Now, why did he need to define at all? Please understand Tilak's definition. At one stroke, you exclude people such as the Jains, the Buddhists, the Lingayats, and others who don't accept the authority of the Vedas. They could be Gnostics as well. So are they non-Hindus? Savarkar emphatically says, no, you cannot tie down the Hindu word to a particular scripture, because there are other inheritors of this great Hindu civilization who may not look upon them as infallible. So he says there are 2 criteria. The first criteria, a Hindu is he whose first and discernible source can be traced to the land that extends from Sindhu to Sindhu. Now the word Sindhu is a proper noun for the river, but the word Sindhu also means the sea. So from the Sindhu to the seas, if the fatherland should be the Hindustan or Sindhustan, that's the first criteria. And the second criterion, a Hindu is he who addresses this land, the Sindhustan, as his holy land, his Punyabhu, who has inherited and claims as his own the Hindu civilization, as represented in a commonality of history, heroes, literature, art, law, jurisprudence, fairs and festivals, rites and rituals, ceremonies and sacraments. And then Savarkar weaves this criteria into a Sanskrit verse. He's an expert in Sanskrit. He's a poet. And so he defines a Hindu as Asindhu Sindhu Paryanta Yasya Bharata Bhumika Pitrubhuh Punyabhushchaiva Savai Hinduriti Sprutaha. Everyone who regards and claims this Bharat Bhumi from the Indus to the seas as his fatherland and holy land is a Hindu. This is Savarkar's definition. Now, please understand, I told you Savarkar, it was very important for Savarkar to see that certain sections of Hindu society, because of mutual suspicion and mistrust, do not fall out of the Hindu fold simply because they follow some other scripture. So he says that any definition of Hindutva that leaves out any important section of our people and forces them either to play false to their convictions or to go outside the pale of Hindutva stands self-condemned. And hence, according to Savarkar, the term Hindu encompasses not just the Vedics, but even the Sanatanis, who also consider the Puranas as important scriptures, but it also includes the Jains, the Bharatiya Buddhists, the Sikhs, the Arya Samajis, the Vaishnavas, the Shaivas, the Veerashaivas, the Lingayats, and so on, even the so-called animists. And typically, Savarkar pithily says, from the Santhal to the Sadhu, all of us are Hindus. But Savarkar is also against any loose misuse of the word Hindu. And it's a sociological definition. It should reflect the reality. So it cannot have, it has to have some scope. And so he says that we have to determine the essentials of Hindutva in the sense in which the word is actually used by an overwhelming majority of our people. He recognizes that some of our countrymen who are originally Hindus have been forcibly converted to a non-Hindu religion. But he says that they are not and they cannot be recognized as Hindus as of now. He gives them an option. Come back to your mother fold and you will be considered as Hindus. But so long as they don't do that, they cannot be considered as Hindus because their theological scriptures force them to set their holy land above their fatherland in their love and allegiance. And so Savarkar is emphatic when he excludes Muslims, Christians, Parsis, and Jews, because these were the non-Hindu communities in India. So basically, adherents of Abrahamic or non-Indic traditions are excluded from Savarkar's definition of Hindutva. Now, how about the Hindu diaspora? There are Hindus all over the world today. What does Savarkar have to say about the Hindu diaspora in his book? So he says that does the mere fact of residence outside Hindustan, does it disqualify a person from becoming a Hindu? No, he says. Let the Hindus contribute all that is best in our civilization to the upbuilding of humanity. Let Hindus enrich the people that inhabit the earth from pole to pole with their virtues. Hindutva does not clip the wings of the Himalayan eagles, but only adds to the urge. Nothing can stand in the way of your desire to expand. That is what he tells the Hindus. And then he says, the only geographical limits of Hindutva are the limits of our earth. Now, Savarkar clearly knows that this is a sociological definition. He himself admits that it cannot be too rigid, but it also cannot be too elastic. He admits there are exceptions to his definition, and himself he mentions Sister Nivedita, Dr. Annie Besant as exceptions to his definition of a Hindu. And the great nationalist that he was, Savarkar was first and foremost a humanist. And he concludes his seminal book with this lofty passage. And what does he say? He says Hindutva merges into humanism. He hopes for that one fine day when the borders of Hindutva will cease and it merges into humanism. What does he say? Equally certain it is that whenever the Hindus come to hold such a position, whence they could dictate terms to the whole world, these terms cannot be very different from the terms which the Gita dictates or the Buddha lays down. Very important, a Hindu is most intensely so when he ceases to be a Hindu and with a Shankara claims the whole earth for a Banaras by saying Varanasi Medini, or with the Maharashtrian saint poet Tukaram, he says, my country, oh brothers, the limits of the universe, there the frontiers of my country lie. It's a tribute to Savarkar's genius that the Constitution of India, though it does not define a Hindu, it describes who is a Hindu in a negative manner. And Savarkar's definition of the Hindu is coterminous with what the Constitution of India says today as to who is a Hindu, to whom the Hindu law will apply. So in a sense, Savarkar's definition today has the validity of the Constitution of India. And in fact, it is the same definition that is used like organizations like Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America. When you admit Hindus, you exactly admit only those people who were thus defined by Savarkar. Thank you so much for your time and your listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shreerang ji. Our next panelist is Saumitra ji. Over to you, Saumitra ji. Now.
Thank you, Sarvajit ji. Thank you so much, Dr. Shreerang Godbole ji, for that wonderful exposition of the term Hindu, Hindutva, its evolution. What I will be focusing on in my presentation is mostly how all this is related to the Hindu diaspora or Hindus that reside outside of Bharat. We already saw that the definition of Hindutva, the attempts made by great scholars, great leaders, Chandranath Basuji and Lokmanya Tilak ji, of course later, Savarkar ji, who elaborated, and Golwalkar Guruji. We have looked at all of those definitions. It was in a certain setting in Bharat that these definitions had to be given or explained. That doesn't mean that Hindus and Hindutva didn't exist before that. It was just a need for that kind of definition in the situation in Bharat that it was made. Hindutva already existed and evolved over the millennia. The civilization, which is millennia old. And in fact, the issue of defining Hindu sometimes draws more opposition from within Hindus than from outside of Hindu fold. The reason being that a Hindu doesn't like drawing borders. To define, we have to draw borders. And a Hindu feels that this othering is not a good idea. But this idea of defining is not at all about othering. We continue to believe that the world is one family. As this last slide in Dr. Godboleji's presentation showed, that even Veer Savarkarji very lucidly explained that this idea of transcendence, you start with your identity and eventually you reach to a point where you transcend it. That kind of universal philosophy the Hindus have. So somebody who thinks like this, who cringes at drawing border itself, is a Hindu. In fact, that makes it easy for us to define the word Hindu. In the definition, two words are used, Pitrubhu and Punyabhu. Sometimes even the word Matrubhu or motherland, cultural motherland is used. The other thing that Veer Savarkarji as well as Golwalkar Guruji constantly mentions is about the cultural unity of the Hindus. There may be many paths, but there is a common culture that defines us. Now, why is Bharat a Punya Bhumi? And this is related to Hindus outside of Bharat as well. Because for many of us Hindus who live outside of Bharat, this is an important point. We may be citizens of that particular country for generations, and yet we will look at Bharat as our Punya Bhumi. Not only the land of ancestors, but a holy land, a sacred land, land of our spiritual nurturing. The reason being, of course, Bharat is the cradle of Hindu civilization. It is on that land that the great intellectual and spiritual traditions developed. The great rishis, gurus, arhats, bhikkhus, who developed these great intellectual as well as spiritual traditions, they lived there, they worked there, and they gave this knowledge. There are several sacred pilgrimage sites. The entire land of Bharat is dotted with it. Whether it is the Char Dham or the Jyotirlinga or the Shakti Peeth or the sites related to Bhagwan Buddha's life, Jain pilgrimage sites, Sikh pilgrimage sites, all of them lie in that particular geography, sacred geography. There are sites related to Ramayana and Mahabharata, and places related to people who lived exemplary lives as per dharma. not only in the spiritual life, but in this life, as per dharma, they lived and they sacrificed for it. Places related to that are there in that land, and hence Bharat remains our cultural and spiritual motherland for Hindus, no matter what part of the world we live. I have experienced myself this feeling amongst the entire diaspora in many, many countries, where no matter how many generations they have lived in those countries, and they love their own countries. They are proud to belong to, whether it is Guyana or Trinidad or South Africa, whichever country. And still they have this special place in their hearts for Bharat. So that definition, it definitely holds in the diaspora. Now, what is this culture, this common culture that we are talking about? Now, the definition of Hindu Dharma given by Veer Savarkarji, nowadays there is a trend to use Indic traditions as another term for that. Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Sikh, in our traditional way of defining, they were called Vedic as well as the Shravana Parampara. All of them put together, and all the varieties, various denominations, paths, dharmas that exist, or dharma traditions we can call them. Is there something common to all of them? Now, we are not talking about their final beliefs, their final conclusions. What we are looking at is a few things that are common to all of them as dharma traditions of Bharat. One is the quest for ultimate truth and lasting happiness. Second, the goal of liberation. The third, seek to experience it by various means, not just understand it, but become seekers to actually experience and realize it. Not only spiritual, but the thinking in all these dharmas is complete and leading a fulfilling life in this world. Whether we see the term called Abhyudaya Nishreyasa, or in Sikhism they have Miri and Piri, all this encompasses the material as well as spiritual. So many times when they say that, oh, Hindus are otherworldly, it is not true. We are comprehensive in our thinking, complete in our thinking, holistic in our thinking, which is common to all these dharmas. And then we look at the morality that all of them teach, the virtues, whether it is Yama Niyama, Daivi Sampad of the Bhagavad Gita, or the Anuvratas of the Jains, or the Arya Ashtangika Marga, eightfold path, noble path of the Buddhists, or Pancha Mahayagyas, or the Maryada in the Sikhs. If you look at all of them, they are all common. And to lead a complete life in this world and eventually try to seek to transcend it is common to all these dharmas. And that's why they are the commonwealth of, we can say, Hindu Dharma. Then what is Hindutva? As again defined, Hindutva is the culture that nourishes the development of all these things for over millennia. So when we say culture, many times we think about just music and dance. That's not what we are talking about. Culture means the values that we give tremendous importance to. Culture means something that we are ready to live by, and if need be, to the supreme sacrifice in defense of it. That is culture. And there are certain things again that is common. It is like nowadays they call in the corporate world organizational culture, culture particular country. So Hindutva is like that. One professor, Dharam Bhavuk in the University of Hawaii, has written about this, that what is the culture that has nourished and that has given rise to so many spiritual geniuses, especially in Bharat. He has listed all of them. And he says that the culture that gives value to a certain thing creates geniuses in that area. And hence in Bharat, we see that so many spiritual geniuses was born. Just to give an example, that the society and culture ultimately nourish the development of these ideas. So it's both ways. This great philosophy, these great truths that were given to us by the rishis and arhats influenced the culture, and the society and culture that was developed in turn gave rise to many more paths. So some truths about our culture which unites us, and that is deep rooted. For example, the truth is one and it can be termed differently as per each one's inner light. That is carved deeply inside our minds. It will never go away. We are willing to accept noble thoughts from all quarters. And there can be pursuits of the wise that can be multiple, infinite. With that comes the respect and acceptance of any sincere effort to achieve it. And in this one, we see avoidance of extremism. There is value given, there is tremendous kind of reverence to single-minded pursuit of one's path and those who have achieved great things in that one. But we are told that we should avoid any kind of narrow-minded extremism about the others. Single-minded pursuit about one's path is perfectly fine, in fact, lauded. But we must avoid the narrow-mindedness and any kind of extremism about the others. This is also very, very essential, quintessential of our culture. And because we see that the entire creation is pervaded with the self-same energy in varying degrees, we attach sacredness to everything here and everyone here, to the Mother Earth and all the living beings on this Mother Earth. We see that there is unity in multiplicity, and that each one of us has the potential to reach where great saints and sannyasis and karma yogis could reach. That is not, nobody is barred from achieving it. Each one of us can achieve that. So that is the culture we are talking about, which gave rise to this kind of complete life. And it gave rise to various cultural forms. So now we are coming more closer to the socio-cultural forms, including social norms, social structure, maybe even political systems. The idea behind all these systems and the attempt to make them so that we attain social cohesion without losing plurality of it. Sustaining society based on dharma has been the mainstay of our expression of this culture. We may have succeeded and we may have failed also. As Swami Vivekananda says, that a Hindu has attempted this. We cannot say that he has always succeeded, but he has sincerely attempted to do this. And to achieve this kind of society, traditions, rituals, festivals, observances, which are helpful in creating this kind of society. And mind you, everything that I'm saying is related to the diaspora. I'm coming there. And then the literature, art forms, architecture, sciences. I would say these are the three ways of looking at it, that anything that is to do with the welfare of everybody, that is Satyam. Because Sat Chit Ananda, when it comes to society, Sat becomes Satyam, it takes the form of welfare of all. Chit becomes Shivam, which means all these sacred rituals, traditions, festivals, observances that help elevate the mind. And living fullest life in this world, Sundaram, so beautiful literature, art forms, architecture, sciences. Those are the cultural forms. And that's why we see reverence to Mother Earth and sacred symbols and so on and so forth. Now this Hindutva, if it is vibrant, it will be collective self-expression. It will be a creative self-expression. And we see that in Bharat everywhere, in millennia, giving rise to so many different traditions, paths, and this entire civilization. And the same Hindutva, when it is vibrant, it will help if there is a deviation, there is a degradation, how to reform and reinvent ourselves. So once upon a time, maybe the animal sacrifice, which was so prevalent, it changed. In the recent times, untouchability and caste discrimination, it was a degradation, it was total deviation. But going back to the Hindu thought, Hindu dharma, our Hindutva actually helped us reinvent ourselves, give up those kind of ills, and come up with new ways of doing things. That is the Hindutva, expression of Hindutva in that way. Then, of course, Hindutva, whenever it was vibrant, and it was always vibrant to different degrees, that it makes us help stand against adharma, resisting anything that is against dharma. And hence, from story of Bhakta Prahlad to Guru Tegh Bahadur, we stood up against anything and anyone who wanted to destroy this culture of ours, of giving respect and acceptance to everyone. That won't be allowed. We are ready to do supreme sacrifice even for that. That is our thinking. That is vibrant Hindutva. And while doing all these things, you see, not that we didn't fight wars and battles and struggles which are not for some people's selfish gains and some land, but largely, culturally, civilizationally, we have stood up for these values, that is Hindutva. And we never gave up creating something that is for universal well-being, for the entire humanity. That is also the ultimate expression of Hindutva. That addressing the human problem, not just addressing Hindu problem. That has always been our case. And now I will just give examples of how this pans out in the diaspora or global Hinduism, Hindu Dharma. Wherever we go, we'll find mandirs. If you go to Southeast Asia, that is the most glorious part of our Hindu history, where Hindutva was so vibrant, the Hindu civilization so full with vitality, that it gave rise to the influence and actually created societies based on Hindutva in many, many countries in Southeast Asia, the remnants of which we'll find even now in Indonesia, especially in Bali, where it is part and parcel of their daily life. You'll find Hindus in Bali doing Trikala Sandhya, men, women, young, old, people of all classes. You'll find mandirs of Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, equal respect of Buddha. If you go to countries which are called as the Girmitia countries, the first things that they did in the first couple of generations, and they had gone there as laborers, mind you, but they started mandirs, they struggled for it, but never gave up this Hindutva, the idea that we must maintain our identity and culture, but we have to also respect everybody else's. It gave rise to new forms, new Tirtha Kshetra. Hence, you'll find Ganga Talab in Mauritius. You'll find Ganga Dhara in Trinidad. You'll find all these people in the Girmitia countries going to the ocean, taking a dip on the Kartik Snan day. That is equally holy and sacred to them. The idea of Ganga is more important. The idea of Ganga that they took with them, they took very little as material things, but they took Hindutva with them. Hindutva traveled with them wherever they went, the culture continued. Even in the new diaspora, the recent one in the Western countries, we see in America, you will find people going to Pittsburgh Balaji and shaving their heads. You will find people going as a pilgrimage to places where Swami Vivekananda gave his speeches. People go to Chicago, I have seen myself, and go and do Sashtang Namaskar in front of the Art Institute. That is equally sacred for us, because that's where Swami Vivekananda gave the message of universal acceptance of Hindu Dharma. In the diaspora, resisting adharma, we were in the forefront. Whether it was Arumuga Navalar in Sri Lanka, who, when the Christian missionaries went and were targeting the Hindu community, he was the one to intellectually respond and resist mass convergence of Hindus. Whether it was Siuda Sadhu in Trinidad and Tobago, where his mandir was demolished by the then colonial government, fought against it and built a temple inside the sea. Recently in Malaysia, when Hindus were targeted, they came in large numbers in Kuala Lumpur to fight against any kind of discrimination. And now we are resisting this kind of Hindu phobia that we are seeing in academia and media in the Western countries. We are always going to resist adharma. Stand not only for us, but in South Africa, Hindus stood shoulder to shoulder with Nelson Mandela to fight against the discrimination against all the people there. That is in our blood. And while doing this, we are not going to give up thinking about the welfare of entire humanity, whether it is through different kind of seva activities, International Day of Yoga, Ayurveda, even in other things, without being even conscious about it. There is a book called The India Way by some UPenn Wharton School professors about how the Indian CEOs are doing things differently. And they speak about how they think holistically, how they think about the greater good. Even after colonized education, all of us are products of that in Bharat. Now that we go outside, this basic samskar, this basic character, our character is still Hindutva. So in the diaspora, we can carry not only the practices, but this original character of ours, original culture of ours, which binds us all. And we have much to offer to the world, I feel. This Hindutva continues to exist and be vibrant. Will it change? Will the meaning change? The meaning doesn't have to change. The character doesn't have to change. It has to give different response to the new situations. It will respond uniquely, creatively to the new changing situations. I will end my presentation with a quote from Nobel laureate Derek Walcott. Derek Walcott was given the Nobel Prize in Literature, and he was from the West Indies. While looking at the Ram Leela in Trinidad and Tobago, he said this: it was as if on the edge of the Central Plains there was another plateau, a raft on which the Ramayana would be poorly performed in this ocean of cane. But that was my writer's view of things, and it was wrong. I was seeing the Ram Leela at Felicity as theater when it was faith. They were not amateurs, but believers. There was no theatrical term to define them. They did not have to psych themselves up to play their roles. Their acting would probably be as buoyant and as natural, etc. I will just miss that. He will say, basically he's saying, they believed in what they were playing, in the sacredness of the text, the validity of India, while I, out of the writer's habit, searched for some sense of elegy, of loss. In fact, he was saying that when all around me there was quite the opposite: elation, delight, in the boys' screams, in the sweet stalls, in more and more costumed characters appearing, a delight of conviction, not loss. So I think Hindutva, it is related to Punya Bhumi Bharat, but when we carry it, we make it part of our life in the new geography, in the new country. And that is the universal aspect of Hindutva that will be carried always with us in the diaspora. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Saumitra ji. I think we have time for a few questions. I have been following the questions in the Q&A box. There are many questions. I will paraphrase one theme that represents several questions, and that is this: are we preaching to the choir? How do we reach out to the younger generations? and the population at large in the diaspora. So this is for Saumitra ji.
From Dr. Kenneth Arad.
How do we correct the misleading messages emanating from our elite universities and prestigious news organizations? So Saumitra ji, would you like to take it? And Shreerang ji can
Sure.
also chime in.
Absolutely. I think our young generation is ready to receive the message. It is how we take it to them. If we take it to them in a way, it answers their question, their quest, and something that is relevant to them, my experience is that they receive it. So whether it is through programs for children that many mandirs do, Bal Vihar, Bala Gokulam, and so on, but even new creative ways of doing things. It could be different in different countries because the situation is different. How we can use internet effectively, because this is where they receive all the information. So we need to put more resources, more of our creative people who can create content, and then how we can disseminate it. Moreover, how we can create experiential programs where collectively they experience it, not only individually, where they can be taken to Bharat, they can be exposed to this in person, they can actually feel it, they can experience it. Those kind of programs, how we can create. Intellectually, we'll have to create much more solid and coherent kind of response to all the allegations that are there. And the struggle in the media and academia is going to be a long one. Right now, I think the first step is to create awareness within our community for the need of this. Many times we are kind of blissfully ignorant, many of the Hindus. First is how we can create awareness. And once the awareness is created, the resources will come. There is no lack of talent. There is no lack of intelligent and creative people in our community. It is just a matter of creating those priorities. And if we can organize it around that, I think just like we have resisted in the past for so many years in different ways, we will be able to resist, stand up, and create something which is lasting. This is what I believe. And there are so many attempts and experiments happening already to reach out to the young people. We just have to increase the pace.
Another question.
Sarvajit ji,
Haji.
can I
Yes, please,
take
please.
one question? Okay,
Yeah.
please, kindly.
Yep.
I want to just take one question. Okay, which is see, there is a very interesting question Vanita ji asked. There is very often in the media and the academia an isolated instance which is normally can be considered an exceptional, an outlier, not normal, an abnormal event is used to paint a picture of a negative picture, a negative portrait of a whole community of hundreds of millions of people. Okay, so as an analogy, right? We have to understand. In the United States, there's a lot of gun violence. On the average, about 100 people die of gun violence per day in the United States. Nobody asks the question, what is wrong with Christianity that there is so much gun violence in the US? Okay, nobody connects, and it is also improper. It's our own, as per our own Hindu dharma, we would not want to connect gun violence. We want to treat it as an aberration. It's a crime, it's an aberration, it is committed by somebody who is not a dharmic individual, and therefore we should not connect gun violence with Christianity as a religion of this country. On the other hand, this rule is constantly violated when it comes to Hindu dharma. Even Hindus themselves have assimilated a view that an aberrant behavior on the part of any one Hindu who is behaving adharmically, and needs to be appropriately censured or punished, is instead repurposed, is reframed as an essential characteristic of the Hindu population, Hindu community. It's a characteristic of Hindutva. I mean, this reframing is a tremendous disservice and is part of the strategies of the Hindu Dveshi, Hindu phobic communities who want to dismantle. So they go on looking for, they research for exceptions. How can I take an exceptional event occurring in some remote part here and there and turn it into and weaponize it to create a characteristic of, paint a whole community, which is by and large extremely accepting, tolerant, and so on. Okay, so we need to understand this particular dynamic clearly. Otherwise, we will also get confused that every time an exception is reported in the media, we will somehow read it or receive it in a manner that it occurs like it is some essential characteristic of us which needs to be reformed, or in Hinduism itself needs to be changed or reformed, etc. Okay, please, Sarvajit, back to you. We can go a little longer.
In fact, I would like to add to what Kalyanji just said. There was a recent, very highly visible instance in a company called Cisco Systems, which is in the Silicon Valley, where a Hindu employee of Dalit origin sued the company and his supervisor, who was also a Hindu, and they were both from IIT Kharagpur, and they knew each other. And he sued him for discrimination against him on the basis of caste. And this thing got blown up, weaponized, and right now, as we speak, the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission is not only investigating this case, but they want to have regulation and legislation forbidding employers from hiring and encouraging Hindus who practice the caste system, particularly in relation to the Dalits. That's an example of how one incident has been amplified, weaponized, and there's a whole movement going on now to brand Hindus as repressors of the Dalits in the diaspora, in the United States. Okay, another question that came up, which is related to the first question that was asked, and this is for Saumitra ji again, says Buddhism, which is essentially derived from Hinduism, is viewed much more favorably in the West. Could you explain why? Is it due to the perception of Hinduism as paganistic, polytheistic faith, or is it because of the caste system? So, so the question is for Saumitra ji or Shreerang ji, whoever wants to take it.
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple of points, and maybe then Shreerang ji can also add to it. I feel it's because there were efforts put to popularize Buddhism in the United States, especially by His Holiness Dalai Lama and his followers and many others. So that is one reason. There is also some attempt to make Buddhism so separate that it almost starts looking, Semitic in character. That is taking it away from its Hindutva character. Because again, as I mentioned about single-mindedness and narrow-mindedness, anything that is narrow-minded, exclusive, and that one is not Hindutva. So I think there may have to be some attempts to reclaim Buddhism from that kind of distortion. However, in the recent years, same things happening about the Vedantic or Hindu ideas also. They are getting popular in the mainstream as well. Not so much in the universities, but now you'll find celebrities here and there openly coming out and saying that they are Hindus, which did not happen a few decades ago. So I think the scene is changing, If we do things right and if we put some more right efforts, I think the scene will change in coming years. That's what I feel. But Shreerang can add more.
Well, even at a personal level, at a social level, people do not like to associate themselves with other people who are weak. So essentially, so long as the mother Hindu society in Bharat doesn't get organized, consolidated, the offshoots of this society would not like to associate themselves with the mother Hindu society. If the mother Hindu society in India is strengthened and India stands up, I'm sure all these problems will vanish. All such movements, the Buddhists, the Sikhs, even the Vedantists now, are being hijacked by interested parties in the West for their own sort of narrative, and it suits their narrative to disconnect them from Hindutva, because that is how you can actually kill not only Hindutva, but you can actually also kill Buddhism. Don't think that they're big lovers of Buddhism. Somebody who wants to separate Buddhism from Hinduism can't be a Buddhist as well. And there are so many misconceptions. It is not that Buddhism doesn't have varnas. For example, the Bodhisattvas traditionally only had to come from 3 varnas. You can check that out. So, I mean, this record has to be set straight at an academic level, at a social level, and India, the mother society in India, has to really rise up before we can expect these distortions to disappear.
Thank you. Shreerang, a couple of questions related to Veer Savarkar himself. So the first one is that there's an objection, there's a widely held objection to Savarkar himself because he's considered to be an self-avowed atheist, devoid of spirituality, opposed to the caste system or protection of the cows, not a practicing Hindu. Why should he be considered an authority on Hinduism or Hindutva? And the related question was, Savarkar used the term fatherland repeatedly in his essay on Hindutva. That seems to invoke very unfavorable comparisons with Hitler, Nazism, fascism, and nationalism. Your thoughts?
So to answer your first question, really it doesn't matter what Savarkar's personal views on God and spirituality were when he wrote Hindutva. It doesn't really matter whether he was an agnostic, an atheist, or he was an astic. Now, there are numerous instances to set the record straight. Contrary to popular perception, Savarkar was not an atheist, he was not an agnostic, but instead he was an astic. He used to say that spirituality is something which needs to be practiced and not spoken about. Okay. He used to meditate regularly at a personal level. He used to meditate regularly and he had experienced Kundalini Jagruti. He was someone who had mastered the Vedas and the Upanishads. I'll give you an example. In his My Transportation for Life, he writes that he spent 1 year in that cellular jail meditating on each principal Upanishad, 1 per month. And that is how he spent 10 months meditating on 10 principal Upanishads. Savarkar knew Manusmriti, Deval Smriti. He has written articles on Manusmriti. He was a scholar of Ramanuja and Shankara. He knew Patanjali's Yoga Sutras by heart. He used to meditate on them while he was in jail. When he used to, walk to and fro, he used to recite the Yoga Sutras. Savarkar was a scholar of Sikh history, of Buddhist history. His unfinished play is on Buddhism. So Savarkar was a Hindu to the core. And while he had studied Western philosophers, in his book Hindutva, he doesn't quote a single Western philosopher. All he gives examples is of Chandbardai, of Rajputs, of Shivaji, of Krishna and all. So Savarkar is a Hindu to the core. Please understand that. In contrast, interestingly, the 2 other books which I mentioned, Baba Rao Savarkar and Golwalkar, you might think, and of course, they were of course spiritual, but in their books, they quote Western philosophers, whereas Savarkar in his Hindutva doesn't quote a single Western philosopher. All he quotes is from Hindu sources. So it's untrue to say that Savarkar was, Semitized or that he was not actually a practicing Hindu. He was a Hindu to the core. Okay. Now coming to your second question about fatherland. Now, actually the word Pitra does not, translate accurately as father. It actually means ancestors. So actually the word Pitrubhu actually means ancestral land. And it is customary to call our ancestral land as our land of the forefathers. We don't say foremothers, okay? And when Savarkar used this word, 1923, actually it is an echo from one of his poems which he composed in 1908, where he used the same words, Pitrubhu Punyabhu. He's a poet. So he's using these two words for their alliterative, impact. And Savarkar has composed several heart-rending Marathi poems where he refers to this land as Matrubhu. And for somebody who, makes this allegation, it's very simple. Go to the timeline. Savarkar wrote this book in 1923. Hitler was nowhere on the horizon in 1923. So Savarkar can't get inspiration from Hitler to call this land as Pitrubhu. And even the word in German, Vaterland, actually means homeland. And even prior to Nazism, this word was used normally in many Germanic languages. And you can give negative attributes to perfectly harmless words. Someone who is in the same league as Hitler, Stalin, he used the word Mother Russia to, during World War II. So he used the word mother. So you can give negative attributes to perfectly harmless words like mother and father. So Savarkar did not have Hitler in his mind, obviously, when he said Pitrubhu. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. So we are running out of time. Should we end the formal session with a thank you, special thanks to both Shreerang ji and Saumitra ji, and thank you very much to the participants, the audience, for being patient with us for such a long but very interesting and illuminating hour. With that, I will turn it over to Kalyanji if he has any final thoughts before we close out the session.
Yeah. So just want to say thank you all for attending. This event is brought to you by the commitment of several organizations, Vishwa Hindu Parishad of America, Hindu Pact, American Hindus Against Defamation, Dharma Civilization Foundation, and it is being supported by Hindu University of America. Jay Bansalji is here. He is the person from VHPA who's been actively engaged in organizing this. I'm sure he will be speaking up in future sessions. Jayji, if you want to say a word or two at this point.
No, I think it's hours late. If Swami Sarveshanandaji is still around, perhaps.
No, he's not. He's not.
That's unfortunate. But I think we'll just, like you said, thank all the panelists for their time and of course wonderful exposition of the topics that they took on. And of course, look forward to further engagements of this nature. Thank you so very much.
So may I end with one comment, okay, for those of you who are still here. See, the Hindu world is a very pluralistic world, and there will always be slight variances between one definition and another definition, So instead of seeking the perfect definition of a term, right, it is better for us to listen to a plurality of voices, learned voices, people who have spent a lot of time on these subjects, so that we can understand the nuances. And each one of us at the end of the day can embrace your own Hindutva in the way you understand it and define it for yourself. And I think that is ultimately a better approach to these conversations, rather than being too concerned about the perfect definition. Okay, so for example, I express my Hindutva by in the current moment by participating in the development of Hindu University of America. That's my expression of Hindutva. I mean, you can ask yourself, what is your expression of Hindutva? And everybody is perfectly free to articulate your Hinduness, your expression of Hinduness, your Hindutva. Okay, with that, I would like to bring the session to a close. Thank you, Shreerang Godbole ji. Thank you, Saumitra Gokhale ji. Wonderful for your, thank you for participating. And the two Swamijis had to leave because they had other engagements. So we will say bye-bye to them. Namaskar, everybody. Please tune in tomorrow. Join the same time. We have two wonderful sessions coming up tomorrow. Namaskar.